Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this week's episode of The Greatest Profession. This week, we are joined by Amber Davidson. Amber and we finally met after a long time of me following her like a creep. Okay, let me explain. So when I was first starting to do relief medicine as kind of a real thing, and I'm trying to find ways to travel and expand my network and all of that, I was talking to the NVA recruiter, and they were saying that, well, actually we have this travel doctor whose job it is to spend a certain number of months in a location, covering maternity leave or temporary staffing issues, deficiencies or whatever. And then she would move on to some other location. And it just so happens that she kept getting sent to these places, and then she would move on, and then I would go to that hospital afterwards. So she actually was in Alaska for a while, and then she left and went to Virginia, and then I did, a couple weeks out in Alaska. And then when I went to Virginia, she had previously been there, and then finally, at some point, we overlapped. So she was still working for NVA as this traveling relief position, or as this traveling ER doctor position. And then I was, doing relief up at that hospital. So, I wasn't doing it on purpose, but I was definitely following her. And, and people would always say, oh, do you guys know each other? So for like about a year before we met, people would be like, oh, you know Amber? No, I don't. But you do keep asking. So I do know who you're talking about. So that's the story of me and Amber. She is an odd bird, which I love because so am I. Or I'm an odd cat, I guess, if we were to get the analog nomenclature. As you would expect from somebody who is willing and signing up for and interested in a position where you are basically a nomad, where you live for a couple of months at a certain location, like a travel nurse, right? Like you live there for a bit and then you leave. So she actually lives in Florida in a tiny home on her father's property. And then she, I think her life goal is to live on a boat and then sail that boat to these shifts. I mean, more power to her. She is somebody who, has always spent time doing outdoorsy things. So like skiing and scuba diving and all that stuff. In fact, the first time I went skiing was on a trip with, Amber and her sister and Lindsay. Yeah. So the first time I would careen down a mountain and into a snowbank was entirely, under the direction and, viewership of the Davidson sisters. So we've done a couple of things, like that in our lives. And she's just doing it differently. Just the way that she's kind of going about it. And it's nice to see, she started doing relief kind of around the same time where I felt like it was getting more popular. So I was already doing it at this point. And she tried to work for a company that was kind of helping with relief doctors, but they just didn't quite understand how to deal with the emergency doctor stuff. So, she's kind of seen this transition and works for herself. And she's been really useful or helpful for me because even though I've been doing it for longer, she's been doing it smarter in terms of the business stuff. So, she recommended to me bookkeeping services and an accountant and, talked to me about 401k stuff when I was just like, I don't know, I'm just trying to afford rent. So like, she has been a person who I luckily have been able to kind of learn from again along the way. And we practice medicine in a totally different way. I mean, the types of hospitals that she enjoys and the types of work that she enjoys completely different from, what I really like to do. And she's happy. I mean, you don't really meet a lot of people within the profession that can truly say, yeah, this is going very well. I like doing this. I don't want to do anything other than how I'm doing it right now, which I think is a really unique perspective to have. And so I appreciate that in her for sure. So without further ado, this is my conversation with Dr. Amber Davidson. It just seems, I mean, it's always seemed irresponsible to just sort of like, fly between hospitals and bring my
Yeah.
germs, from one to another. But
Yep. Oh, because we are by far the biggest fomites in the hospital.
right, exactly. Which I was always surprised that people still invited us. It's like, I felt like it
Yeah.
was like, they're like, la, 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 we just need help. Like, please, I don't care.
And it was not that long ago that I wasn't feeling great. And I contacted a hospital because I was going to have to work like in the next few days. And I was like, do you want me to COVID test? And they were like, no.
Please don't.
Okay. They don't want to know
Yeah,
because if they know, then they have to do something about it.
yeah.
It was funny.
There were
I was like,
hospitals.
okay.
I agree. Somewhere in that like 20, gosh, mid 2021, maybe early mid 2021, the hospitals started diverging. Some of them were like, you still have to test. If you are testing positive, then you can't work for 14 days and all that. And the other ones are like, just don't tell me. Like, oh,
Yeah.
please, we're so busy. We just need help. Like, don't let me know.
Don't
Yeah,
tell me.
yeah. Well, if you want, we can get into it or whatever it is.
Yeah, sure.
I mean, we're kind of already into it. What has happened is I've met so many people over the course of these past couple of years, and just as I'm doing it, I'm always like, why in the hell is anybody doing this? Like I don't know. I don't know how anyone started. I don't know why we're still doing it. I don't understand any of that. I mean, I happened into it just randomly, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know.
I did it more on purpose. Veterinary medicine, I unfortunately did on purpose.
Yeah.
It was unfortunate.
What?
Um, it's one of those things that you look back and you're like, there are so many better career paths that make more money, take less time, et cetera, et cetera. Like, I don't know why I did this looking back in
Yeah, and
hindsight.
you and your sister both. I mean, what did that look
Yeah, well,
like?
actually, my sister is more accidental than on purpose. I, on purpose, screwed myself.
And then
And she accidentally did because she actually wanted to be a physician's assistant, which would have been a much better idea, honestly.
right.
But she ended up with all of my jobs when I left. So I found all my very specific. Like I worked at the Equine Performance Lab at University of Florida. I worked worked as an on-call surgery tech. Um,
And this is
so
obviously before vet school
this is in college.
in
Yeah, this is in
college.
college. And so I found all these like very vet specific cool jobs, quite cool jobs. Like both of them are quite fun and or were quite fun. And when I left, my sister, like both of my bosses were like, well, do you have someone? And I was like, well, yeah, my sister is coming to coming to college. She's 5 years behind me. So when I went to vet school, she stepped into both of my jobs. And she basically, I mean, like they interviewed her and they had to pretend to interview other people.
Right.
But they, they hired her on the spot basically
I love that they're
because
just
they
like,
were
do you
like,
have
oh,
someone who like kind of looks like you, that it's approximately your same height, that could
yeah.
fill in this job?
Because I mean, and university jobs especially, they hate hiring people because they're stuck with them.
So
Yeah,
did so
so
did,
they
did
were very happy to have my sister on board.
did she actually start enjoying the things, or was it just like once she found herself in the path that you've made, and she's like, all right, I guess this is what I do now.
Oh, I think she does enjoy it. But I mean, now in hindsight, I'm like, nah, should have been like, yeah, you should go for PA's assistant. That would be a good idea.
She still can. There's still time in life.
It's true. It's true. But you hate to have wasted all this time and effort and then be like, well, never mind.
Yeah. So did you guys grow up in Florida?
Yeah, we grew up in Florida.
In the same.
Um, so I grew up Melbourne, Florida. I think both of my parents moved around and were like both military brats when they were growing up. And so they decided, nope, we're not going to move. And so I didn't move my entire 18 years that I lived with my parents.
Wow.
Then went to University of Florida. So did there for what? It was actually 6 years.
And
I
that's
actually graduated in 4 and then played around for another 2. So I tried to get into vet school my first year out of college. And they said, basically my exit interview went like this. They were like, so you are a white female. And I'm like, yeah. And they're like, yeah.
there's a lot of you.
There's a lot of you.
So otherwise, there would have been like like a strict transition or a straight transition from undergrad to vet school. Is that how that works there?
Yeah, I would have, but I got denied. And then played around for a couple of years. And they also said, like, yeah, you could use some more experience. I'm like, all right. So got some experience, did my equine performance lab and surgery tech job and
At what
blah de blah.
at what point during all this, like, when did you decide, you know what, I'm gonna try for veterinary medicine? Like, when did you say that you wanted to be a vet?
Oh, when I was young.
Like how?
So
Like,
I wanted to be a vet when I was young. I actually really liked medical. I'm actually, science and math is our big things. Good at science and math, and so that's the way I went.
was there anything that, like, specifically that sort of drew you to it, or was it just kind of one of those things that you found
I
yourself?
would say we did a lot of like animal rescues when I was little. Um, my dad is big into he'll, give this turtle a chance, and like we made our pool into a turtle sanctuary at one point, and like
Hmm.
had snakes and turtles, and we had squirrels because our cat killed the mom and raised
Right.
them, which I think was mostly my dad. My mom is medical. My dad is a chemical engineer.
It's interesting because, like, I don't know, when I was growing up it was all neuroscience, and because my mom was a speech pathologist who
Okay.
worked with a lot of brain injury patients. She was living, or when I was like young, she was working in East LA, and so it was a lot of you know, trauma, gang violence type of
Yeah, yeah.
stuff. So
Yep.
it was a lot of these things that were, hey, this very small lesion led to this very big problem. And then she started working with a guy named Ramachandran who did all of these like case study things where, he would identify these very small lesions. And do you know Oliver Sacks? He
I
has
don't know.
he has a bunch of books. I mean, he was the subject of that movie Awakenings with Robin Williams. Um, but anyway, so it's that same type of idea. It's like, hey, this is a very bizarre thing. It's super unique. What is going on here? And then this is, the brain lesion underlying it. So
Yeah.
that was sort of my thing. But I loved it for that reason. But same thing, science and math. I just, for whatever reason, I couldn't like get enough of it.
Yeah. We had a college prep program when I was in high school, so thank God I took AP Bio. That was one of the best things I ever did because biology classes are a weed out course in
Right.
college.
Yeah. Because, like, as I know you, you are this, like, I don't know. I would imagine that you spent a childhood like jumping out of planes and skiing, like, diving to the bottom of the ocean, being like, "All right, here we go." Like,
We did a lot of diving. We had a Brownlee when we were young, which
what?
is basically one of those, kind of like a snuba, um,
Oh, is
or
that
what
like
they call
that
them,
little motorized
scuba.
thing that you hold on to?
Yep,
And okay,
yep. You like put some gas and whatever in it, and you can either you buy a little boat. Actually, yeah. It's supposed to come with a boat. My dad made a boat for it,
okay,
and you would like. I don't know, pull it around on the surface with you. I think this was kind of before they even were supposed to do that. Um, and then, of course, you're like down on the bottom, and all of a sudden you ran out of gas, and you're like, well, out of air. Guess I'm done.
wow.
This lobster's gonna stay here.
So I mean, with like then the background in, hey, I'm gonna go look at all these sort of sea creatures, and then you mentioned equine stuff. Like, how did you end up in small animal? I mean, I guess it's probably a thing, but did you sort of always know, hey, small animal, or were you ever tempted by any of
I
these
actually
other?
thought I was gonna do mixed breed or mixed practice,
Okay.
and then I realized there's no money in that, and I need to make money because loans. So that didn't go so well. I actually really thought I was going to end up in mixed practice.
Oh,
Um, but, and I have some friends that end up in mixed practice and they just don't make money. Their work-life balance is even worse
yeah.
than a small animal job. I don't know a single mixed animal practice person that is not just, it's nonstop.
Yeah, I think
Um,
I'm sure it's
and
possible, but I agree. I feel like a lot of the people that I know that have done mixed practice are mostly large animal people who find that the best way for them to get some balance in their life and a little bit more money is to do the small animal stuff too.
yeah,
But then it's a
yep,
lot of like on call and a lot of those things. I'm sure that it
yeah,
exists
yeah.
in other ways too, but I agree. I don't know any
I'm
what
sure
else.
they must, otherwise they wouldn't have anybody working.
Sure.
Or maybe they just burn them out and then stop. I don't know.
No.
I found that a lot of times it's the younger vets that haven't burnt out yet, or it's the much older vets, and that's kind of is the deal.
Well, I guess it's up to the ones in the middle to kind of figure it out, or the younger ones that are kind of moving to the
Yeah,
middle. I think that that's what's happening
which
sort of in general right now, right?
yeah,
It's like we're
but
all
I also think that that's part of why they have such bad large animal needs is because people aren't willing to do that anymore. Um,
but the beauty is that
and
the
I do
people who
think,
are willing love it. I mean, the people who love it,
yeah,
and that's great. I
yeah.
mean, as
Well,
a
and nowadays you can actually get a lot of your student loans paid off.
oh, that's true.
Um,
Yeah, if you do
yeah, you can do a lot of that, which if people aren't, they should be,
right,
because most of the mixed animal practice you can qualify for student loan repayment, just because there's a lot of need and they do have subsidies for that.
right.
So,
So then between undergrad and then you said you kind of gallivanted around a little bit before you ended up in vet school. What were you doing at that time?
no, I was just working. So I was mostly working and playing around a little bit.
I was filling
I
up
did a
trucks with
Europe
oranges and
tour. Yeah, like I did a backpacking Europe tour. Spent a lot of time in Honduras. My mom is very involved in Honduras, still is. So I built a lot of houses down there and like did all kinds of other nonsense
oh,
that
in
passing out food and all that kind of nonsense, which
would say
eh,
that I would say that those that benefited from it did not consider it
yeah,
nonsense.
yeah.
In what
It's
ways?
a lot. It's a lot, just like any other third world country. Just a lot of passing out food and medical care and
Yeah.
building houses. And
In what way is your mom involved down there still? What do you mean?
she runs a medical clinic down there still. And she lives there probably maybe 50% of the time, constantly trying to, raise money for it and such and so on.
Hmm.
And I'll go down there and, help build houses or whatever for, a couple of weeks and then hang out with her a little bit. Roatan is amazing. So Roatan's one of the islands off of Honduras.
Hmm.
Um, I would say like most of my scuba diving has been there, and snorkeling is fantastic. You ever need a spot to like go scuba or snorkeling at? Roatan.
Nice.
It's really an amazing reef.
That's where
So
you guys are trying to
Roatan,
convince me to like go and attempt this whole scuba diving.
yeah.
What will very likely be a catastrophe.
Eh, maybe, maybe.
Perhaps.
You never know until you actually try it.
Yeah, we'll see. Yeah,
Of
I mean,
course,
you're right.
we all did it when we were young, so
Right.
eh, I grew up doing it,
Yeah.
which is a little bit different than getting into it when you're older, but it's still fun. It doesn't mean you have to be like my dad is. He used to do some of the deep diving for NASA when they were going and getting, some of the boosters and all that kind of stuff, which he has, some certifications that, are probably all out now, but he used to be able to deep water dive and do all kinds of crazy stuff with that, which if you get into it, it's really interesting. The pressures that those people go under, and they have to like live on basically what looks like a submarine,
Hmm.
and they live in a submarine on the water, and then they like get transported down to like do their job, which it's really insane if you
That's
actually look
crazy.
into it.
That's crazy. Was he doing that when you guys were kids?
Yeah. Yep.
So then you spent that time sort of meandering around, and then you ended up going to vet school overseas, right?
I did. I actually applied for New Zealand, Royal Veterinary College, and University of Florida again. University of Florida, I want to say rejected me again. It's actually hard to remember now. I can't believe I can't remember.
I know it seems like
Pretty
such a
sure I
big
got
deal at the
rejected.
time. It seems
Yeah, it
terrible
seemed
the
like
next.
such a
Like,
big deal at the time, and it was so terrible. Either way, I know I got accepted in New Zealand, Royal Veterinary College, and I can't remember Florida. And I decided to go to Royal Veterinary College
so those are the
just
only ones
because,
that you applied to.
yeah, I'm
Oh,
not one of those like, you know what, I'm going to apply to 15 schools.
right.
I'm only going to apply to the ones that I legit think I'm going to go to, especially since it costs money to do that.
Yeah, so why not
So,
any in the states? Like Georgia's kind of nearby, you know? There's Tennessee and
yeah,
North
I could
Carolina.
have.
But why
I
not?
could have. I don't know. I guess I wanted to either do it easily locally or I wanted to go somewhere.
Mm,
And Georgia just didn't do it for me.
right. Huh.
Like really go somewhere. So, which is how I ended up in London.
And how was that?
It was amazing. I loved living in London. Loved being a student in London.
And you were how old were you at that time?
I was 23, 23, 24,
Okay.
22,
Okay. So,
somewhere around there.
so still pretty young.
Yeah,
Okay.
which was quite funny because Royal Veterinary College, you know, the London school system is totally different. And you end up in vet school, at least the first year is actually condensed so that it's just international students and people with previous degrees, basically. So the first year, it was very much a small class, if you will. Um, like those of us with previous degrees, those of us that, you know, are all international students, which was actually really fun. Lots of people from Australia, Hong Kong, some British kids,
Wow.
Americans. Like it was really quite fun.
And how
And
many?
then,
Like how small of a group?
whew, it was like I want to say there was about 40 of us,
Oh, cool. Wow.
so quite small,
Yeah.
quite small. And then we get dumped into the rest of the classes that for their last 3 years. So we basically do the first 2 years in one, which, you know, honestly wasn't that hard. Because you have a previous degree, and those guys that are going into vet school in London are doing a 5-year program, and they've really haven't been to what they would call uni college for us.
Right.
But they also don't do high school like we do it, so it's all a very strange deal to try to integrate.
Huh.
Um, and it was harder. I always thought, like, why doesn't America have like just, you know, going into vet school kind of degree? But actually, I'm really glad that that was not the case because that's what they do in London, and they don't know how to fucking spell. Sorry, I don't know if I'm
Oh.
allowed to
Yeah.
curse on
Go
this.
for it. Whatever.
Which they couldn't spell. Like they don't have history classes, they don't have English classes. I mean, I hated all those to some degree,
Right.
but I did learn things, like I did know things about it. None of that.
Wow.
So I feel like you're a much more rounded person as someone from a previous degree than the 18-year-olds that were coming into vet school in London,
That's crazy.
which
I couldn't
I thought
imagine.
was super weird.
I came into vet school when I was 29. I couldn't like imagine doing it at 18.
Yeah.
And yeah, to your point, there was a at University or UCSD where I went to undergrad. There's a bunch of different colleges, and the one I went to, which was Revelle, they had this humanities program that was just brutal. It was like no one can get an A in the first one. It's a 5 quarter series, and the goal
Yeah.
is basically just like read a bunch of old text, and you kind of like move through, everything from like the Bible and the Odyssey and all that kind of stuff, like all the way up to, like Mouse and those things kind of more recent. So, and that whole stretch is just philosophy, literature, and just essays and essays and essays. And I
Yeah.
will say that like it was brutal, but I learned a ton, especially about how to, structure a paper, which is the same way that then I have learned to structure, cover letters and
Yeah.
emails and things like that. I mean,
Yep.
it's like, yeah, I mean
It's funny. It's what you don't realize is actually a life skill.
yeah, right,
Oh, this is a life skill.
yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
who knew?
They do that pretty commonly. I think in France and Portugal also, it's a very similar thing where it's like, you finish your
Yeah, they do.
secondary
They do a lot
education.
of it in Europe.
Yeah.
Yep.
Wow. Okay. So then they did some things. At some point, you met them in the middle, and then you started kind of going all together, right?
Yep.
All the ones who were living over there.
Which which basically what they did was they took all of us that actually had life experience. This sounds weird to say it like that, but
Right.
actually had life experience and then scattered us throughout the little babies.
Teach
Because
these children
honestly,
something.
it was one of those, you would have group exercises, right? And it would be, here's this scenario. And those of us who actually have worked in vet practices and have real life experience are like, no, that idea is not going to work. Because here's, realistic things.
So then out of that program, all the people that kind of came from all over, do you think, or do you know that they all kind of went back to where they came from, or did they sort of scatter across the world to do
They
their?
scattered a little bit. I know one British guy that's in Hong Kong at the moment, and actually another two internal medicine specialists that are also in Hong Kong,
Hmm.
which is interesting.
Yeah.
I actually interviewed for there. They offered me less money than I work now with more hours, and I was like, nah, no. So
I remember I got an email about some emergency department out in Hong Kong years ago, and I briefly thought about it, but I didn't think that I was an emergency doctor at that point. So, like,
yeah,
like I was doing emergency, but I just wasn't convinced that I was doing it correctly or that I would keep doing it. So I'm like, oh, never
yeah,
mind.
yeah, yeah. Well, they're apparently still looking.
Sure. So then, did
Yeah.
you ever consider anything like that? I mean, so you thought about the Hong Kong one, but like when you're sitting at that precipice and you got the hat and you threw it up in the air or whatever the whatever
I
you
actually
do.
missed, I missed my graduation actually.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
My
missed
whole
it.
my whole goal was to speak at graduation. There's no way that I was gonna miss it.
Did you
Why?
get to speak?
Hell yeah, I did. Man, I was so
Ah.
happy. Like literally from day one, I was just like, I don't know what the hell I'm doing in this program, but I just want to speak at graduation. And so, so actually,
That's funny.
I opened, I started the speech, like I had the speech written when I was at graduation, and I just, extemporaneously said beforehand, like ever since I started vet school, my only goal was to speak at graduation, which was a true statement, but apparently a huge joke because it got a laugh, which I did not expect. A laugh and a cheer. So apparently that's a silly goal to enter vet school with. I've learned.
Huh. Okay.
I suppose it's like graduate, be a
Yeah.
doctor, whatever. But
Yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
have those
Yeah.
goals.
Speak of graduation. Yeah.
Why'd you miss yours?
I missed mine because I was starting my rotating internship in Miami, and obviously, the European
Right,
schools are off by a couple of months.
right.
So technically, I was already late to start my internship,
So you already
and
knew.
yeah, and may have influenced. I had so many points built up on British Airways that I could fly first class back.
Oh,
And for whatever reason, I could only get the first class tickets before graduation, not after. So I was like, well, I'm flying back first class. That's a thing. So I missed graduation.
that's amazing. So then you already knew that you wanted to do a rotating internship at that point. So you were kind of
Yeah.
moving down the small
I
animal.
actually thought I wanted to be a criticalist at one point, and then thought, oh shit, I don't like any of that.
Says the emergency doctor.
Yeah. Well, I like triage and I like doing surgery and I like, all of those things that are not acid base
Right.
and
Like,
ventilator and long term trying to manage this, blah, blah, blah.
right. Ions and math, or like CRI calculations, and
CRI, well, actually, I don't mind CRI,
yeah.
but I don't like the long term management of shitty cases,
Right.
if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Which is totally what a criticalist does, as
Yeah.
well as ventilators and,
Yeah, whereas I feel like I love that stuff
renal
because it's,
replacement therapy and blah, 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 blah.
yeah, because now we're talking about sort of like this interesting area of science and theory, and what you are balancing all of these different pieces of the physiology to figure out
Yes.
how to improve this patient, which I do
Yep.
love. I mean, really, the only reason I've thought about going into specialty a bunch of times, it fits me as a person, but I don't
Yeah.
know that I want to. Truly, I don't know if I want a job.
Oregon for 3 years.
Well, I don't mind like the short term. It's more what happens afterwards, and especially with a criticalist.
Yeah.
I mean, I would have to have a job with somebody, and I'm just not like
Yeah. You have to have a job with somebody, and it's more limited than an ER doctor,
Yeah, that's
if that
true.
makes sense.
That's
Which an
true.
ER doctor is very much, at least for me, you're not great at anything, but you're good at everything,
Right. Right.
which is what you need to do to just be decent at everything as opposed to very good at something. And that very much means, other than GP, which is even more options, ER, you got a lot of options. If you want to be somewhere, you can go there.
Yeah, that's true. And you can slide
'Cause-
into a GP, I would say relatively
yeah,
easily.
yeah.
Yeah, now that I'm saying it,
I have.
I panic.
It's. I panic. I panic and I call my sister or text my sister
Right.
and I'm like, what the fuck is this?
Yeah, the
Because
number of
for
texts.
me, the long-term planning thing really gets me. And they're
Right.
like, when should we come see you back? I'm like,
Right. Right.
no.
Yeah, please don't.
Please don't. Don't come see me.
And so when you did your internship, did you, I guess at what point, because I know that you then started doing this travel, emergency doctor thing, working
Yeah,
for a
so
specific company. Was that like straight
I
away
worked
or?
at, no, I worked at MedVet. So I fucked off again and went
All right. I finished my rotating
I
internship.
went to New Zealand for 6 months, I want to say. It was like
With
6
all that
months.
money that you saved up from the internship.
Yeah. To be honest, I am a saver. So I honestly didn't spend like hardly any money. And when we would go out, it was with a lot of the owners of the practice, which were really fun, by the way.
Nice.
So I didn't spend anything when we would go out because we would go out with like the owners and other people and they would pay.
So, okay, so you meandered through, gosh, see, I didn't do any of that. That 6 months in New Zealand thing. I'm so jealous.
Yeah, I meandered through New Zealand. I went hiking every single day, at least once,
Wow,
sometimes multiple hikes per day.
that's
I
awesome.
mean, it was really fun.
And did you like
And I
rent a car, buy a car,
I
thumb
bought
your
a
way?
car
Wow.
and it was actually a Toyota Harrier, which is actually, when I like come back, I'm like, oh shit, that is a Lexus RX 350. That is the
Oh,
exact same car that I had, except it's called a Toyota Harrier, Japanese made.
nice.
And obviously these are all like right-hand drive,
Right.
which I already could do because I still have
Yeah, you were training
my
in London.
like in London I drove, and I have a driver's license for the UK still,
Oh,
which
still?
turns out, yeah. I'm actually not sure. I should see if it expires at some point. It was like one of those things. It like goes for like 10 years.
Oh.
So it's probably coming up there. Let's see.
That's awesome.
2023, July of 2023. So next year.
You have it accessible? Like, did you just pull it out?
Yeah. It's in my wallet. You never know when you're in a foreign country and you're like, oh, need a left-hand driver's license.
That's amazing. So you bought a car and just drove around and what, like camped
So
or?
literally, I stealth camped. Yeah,
Wow.
which is getting harder. Was getting harder. Is harder, because people were, being gross, and so they started shutting down a lot of, the places where you could kind of just camp. You then needed to like pay to camp somewhere.
Right.
So I got one of those Toyota Harriers that actually has a mirrored window finish. So you couldn't see me as long as I kept lights off at night.
Right.
So I would literally just park it, and it doesn't look like a camper van, right?
No.
So I would literally just park it on the street or park it like in a park or wherever there were other vehicles that doesn't look like anybody's camping. And I would literally like go to a pub or whatever, close out, brush my teeth in the bathroom, and then like hop in my car and then stealthily slink back to the back and go to sleep. Which was the way to do it.
Yeah.
I saw multiple people like with real camper van looking things get ticketed.
Right.
Like they would full on give you like a $200 and something ticket if they caught you camper vanning where you weren't supposed to be.
That's awesome.
So,
man, that's awesome. Yeah. The original camper van or van lifers.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
And then, by the way, my dad has always been convinced that I should get a big metal truck or white van or whatever when I was in college and put like Amber's Electric on it.
Okay.
He was like, this would be the ultimate thing. Like you could just move to different construction sites and nobody would ever know that you didn't do construction, that you just lived there. You could save so much money on, all your rent.
That's awesome. I thought
Just
about
Amber's Electric.
especially during COVID, I definitely thought about getting a camper van and just, it'd have to be something with a shower. And all these hospitals would absolutely let you, stay in their parking lots
definitely.
and all that. I thought about
Definitely
then I would make it a different company and then I would still charge myself rent, right? Because they're paying for my lodging anyway.
Yeah.
But then I've got all my stuff and I'm right there and, I don't have to worry about.
Yep. Yeah.
So then you were off in New Zealand, not thinking about veterinary medicine at all. You were just,
I just messed around for, it was like 6 months.
Did you know it was going to be 6 months or did you just go with an open-ended?
No, I just went and I was like, no, I'm going to come back at some point.
And what?
So I bought like a ticket, I think a few months out, and then I would just move it occasionally until I felt like going.
Yeah. So what was that? How did you know? Well, I guess I'm going back to the United States now.
Yeah. Most of it was it's getting cold. Like, man, it's really cold. Yeah. Camper vanning is only okay in, summertime in New Zealand.
But you could have tried to get a job or something, right? I mean, couldn't you have applied for a visa?
Yeah, I could have. You can actually get a student, a visa card. And actually, that's how I got an original visa. I was like, I'm a skilled worker. And they're like, yes, you are. Here's your visa. And I could only work like 20 hours a week or something like that, though. So it also makes it more complicated because the work has to go through extra steps to hire you. And guess how many ERs there are in New Zealand?
Yeah, I don't know.
2.
Really?
There's one in Auckland and there's one in Wellington.
Wow.
And the Wellington one was new when I was over there. And I'll tell you right now, the one in Auckland I toured just for funsies because, I don't know, they're like, oh, you're a vet? You can come in here. It was a little bit scary. They didn't even have a vet there. It was an ER, but they didn't have anybody at night. And so the surgery cases were managed by one of the techs.
Right.
And da 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 da. So it was like,
Huh.
I don't know if I want to
2.
get involved with this. And 20 hours?
Yeah. I
I
wonder.
mean, you can't even work for an ER for 20 hours a week because that's like
That's less than
one
2
and a half
shifts.
shifts. One and a half
Right.
shifts? Like, I don't know how that would work.
Okay. So it got cold and you came back.
Yeah, I got cold, came back.
And then went.
Because, yeah, it's actually cold in New Zealand. I didn't really prepare for that. Really?
Sure.
It's cold.
So then what? So
Yeah.
you got back to the States and then.
Got back to the States, did the whole here's, me as a baby vet applying to jobs. Ended up in Louisiana
Oh, right.
at a med vet there, which is huge now. It was only like 3 clinics, like a couple
Yeah.
in Ohio and one in Louisiana when I started with them.
Yeah.
Um, Worked for them for a couple of years. Had some straws that broke the camel's back, kind of stuff, and then decided I want to travel again and play, and hooked up with NVA. And I was like, oh, I was looking around at that point, and I was like, I'm looking for a job. I want to travel. And they're like, well, we could make you a job. Do you remember we went to that NVA party in
Yeah.
San Antonio?
Yeah.
The lady in charge of that is Danielle DeLapp.
Okay.
I don't know if you knew that. She
I-
was the one in charge of that. So she was actually, she's like, used to be a headhunter. And now she is like in charge of lots and lots of things.
Oh, nice.
She was the original one that I talked to and was like, I want to, travel and do that. And they're like, we can make you a job. And I'm like, okay. And so they made me a job traveling around to different NVAs on emergency basis, like on their emergency service.
Oh, that's really cool. So they didn't
And
have that already set up as a
they did
relief.
not have that set up.
That's
I
awesome.
asked them and was like, can I do this? And they were like, yes, I think we can do that. And then we did it.
That's really cool because a lot of companies now do have one, right? I mean, that's like a
Yes.
thing that has
A lot
emerged
of
from
companies do
COVID.
have one. And it's actually quite funny because if I talk to, like, I've talked to Blue Pearl people,
Hmm.
they're like, oh, you're Davidson, you're NVA's, relief,
That's
traveling relief person.
right.
They're still looking for another Davidson. I'm like, yeah. And Blue Pearl is another one that I talked them through the good things about it and the bad things about it. And then they made a position.
Mm,
They were trying to get me to do that position, but they couldn't offer me enough money to do
right,
it. So,
right.
yeah.
Hmm.
But they also had talked to me about it way back when I was thinking about, I was stopping NVA, but I wasn't sure what I was doing after that. I talked to a lot of people at that point.
And you did the traveling stuff with NBA for like a
Two
year, 2 years.
years,
Okay.
another 2 years. So I basically worked for people for about 4 years of my career.
Right.
And then I had like a few months where I worked for independent vets and
That's
then
right.
realized that wasn't going to work
Well,
because they didn't
they didn't.
have it really set up for someone like me.
Right. They didn't have an ER side, and because I
Yeah, and
remember
they also
talking to
didn't
them.
have hardly an ER side. Yeah,
Yeah, I remember talking
which
to them
they
about
they
that.
do a lot more now, but I was their first ER vet.
Right.
And so they didn't really know what to do with me. The
Right.
other problem is theirs is set up for I live here
Right.
and I work shifts in this area.
Yeah.
Whereas I am more of I work wherever I feel like going,
Yeah.
which didn't work out so well with their system, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So then when you quit NVA and started doing it on your own, I mean, obviously you were licensed in Virginia and then living in Florida. Did you, I guess, how did you expand your network or did you need to at that point?
Honestly, I still haven't needed to some extent.
Yeah.
People find me on, I don't know if people find you on Indeed, but there's more people that find me on Indeed than I know what to do with.
Oh,
People are nonstop asking me if I can work these shifts
right.
and, oh, do you want a job? And I'm like, no, I work relief. And they're like, yeah, but you could have a job. I'm like, no, I work relief.
Right. I didn't know that
So,
people could find you on Indeed.
oh yes.
I didn't know that that
So
was a thing.
there's actually a thing on Indeed, and it says open. It's like a little setting on your profile, and it says open to opportunities or
Oh,
something
okay.
along those lines. That's what that means.
So,
That means people can find you and then offer you jobs if they feel like. Which, to be honest, I probably should take it off, but I found some good things through that. A
yeah,
lot of them are like GP. Here, do you want to work GP for us? I'm like, no,
right.
I work ER relief. If you had read my profile at all, but
Yeah, surefire where they don't, they don't.
yeah,
That's okay. So then you must have used Indeed for getting a job at some point or looking for a job at some point. Is that why?
people have found me on Indeed. To be honest, I think I was on Indeed
Yeah, like why do you have an account?
because
What
it
did
was a thing to do in vet school and job
Oh,
and blah blah blah. Like it was a thing. You're like, oh, you should do this,
I see.
and so I did it, and
That's
then
fascinating.
didn't use it for a long time. And then when I became independent, it's a little bit more useful, I guess. Although it's really not that hard. All you have to do is contact wherever you want to go and be like, hey, do you need
Right.
help? And they're like, yes, we need
Yeah.
help.
Yeah,
We'll
especially
pay for
now.
you. Yeah. So
Yeah, I'm the
to be
worst at
honest,
that
it's not.
traditional networking thing. Like I don't have I mean I have a LinkedIn and but I'll check it once a year maybe. And I've gone in and you see these messages. It's like, "Oh, hey, would you like to come work?" But it's like 4 months ago and I'm like, "I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
I had no I had no idea." Yeah,
Yep.
okay. So then you haven't really had to so then you knew people or people are contacting you or whatever it might be, and then you just
Yes.
sort of say
Even
like,
with just even with just the NVA hospitals that I had worked at,
right.
most of them still needed help. They
Yeah.
did this whole, in theory, we're going to have you work somewhere for 6 months and then we'll find a doctor and then we'll move you to the next location. I'm like, uh-huh.
Right.
And a lot of times, you're at a hospital that's 3 people down as opposed to in theory, yes, I would be going and replacing people on maternity leave, but that's not what it is right now.
Right.
I'm going to a practice that's 3 or 5 vets down and are desperate
Yeah.
and are using 50% of the people that work for them are relief vets, which seems to be the case right now, which doesn't seem to be changing
I mean,
anytime soon,
it
I
can't
guess.
change. Yeah, it can't change that rapidly. I mean, there's a process of getting people into those gigs, and truly, God, and we can talk about this forever, but I think that there's this perception that relief is this kind of thing in the distance, and it's just like this grand trophy that you can go and be like, oh, look, I get flexibility and more money and all these things, but it's like there's a lot of
Yeah.
work that goes into it also, and the
Yep.
the life itself is not for everyone. I mean,
No.
especially the way that you and I do it, which is to travel around and not necessarily
Yep.
go to the
And
hospital.
you insert yourself into the hospital and I try really hard, like, hey, if this is the way you do things, as long as it's not ridiculous, sure, we can do it that way. I
Right.
don't care.
Yeah.
Like, does it need to be on a syringe pump versus, a put it in fluids versus whatever? I don't care. I
Right.
can do the math. Whichever way you guys normally do it is fine.
Right. Yeah, and I agree. I mean, I think that that's, truly, I think that that's how you add value and makes it so that people want to like bring you back and things like that too. You're just making their lives easier. The harder it is for
Yes.
them to like go to your way of doing something,
Yes.
yeah, it's tough for them, and then you can see fewer things, and then there's a greater potential of people being unhappy. I agree. I
Yep.
agree, but I do think that's a skill. I think that that's something that
Oh, I
that
definitely think it definitely is a skill. I mean,
yeah, and it's something that
as
you
much as I think anybody could do this, it's probably not just anybody, because yes, you do have to be flexible and you do have to be able to like, oh, which drugs do you have?
right.
Because this is the what I have to use, or
Yeah.
or
Yeah, it's like having preferences and having what you want to practice as your medicine, but then being super flexible on that depending circumstances. You know,
yes.
yeah, it's like is this medication better than this medication? Like sure, but like I mean at the end of the day, if this is all you got, then this is all you got. I mean, if you,
Yep.
I've run
Yep.
hydromorphone CRIs, absolutely. Like, of course I have.
Yep. Yep.
Um, yeah,
Especially during that whole deal where we had no meds.
sure.
That was terrible.
I remember, yeah, gosh, I remember when we couldn't use propofol, and then what Euthasol was on back order too. I mean,
Yeah.
those were
You're
some
like, oh shit.
right. I'm like, all right. I remember using a lot of ace promazine during that time, which I mean, it's like
Yeah.
it's just interesting because you have a certain way of doing it that you've kind of become comfortable with, and so now you're
Yep.
in the euthanasia room with unexpected events, and the dogs are like moving and whatever. I'm like, I swear they're asleep. It's like
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yep. And I guess there are a lot of people that want the steady work and a guarantee that they're going to have work, which I think is the other part that people are really nervous about. Not only going into a different hospital and having to work with people you don't know, which both you and I do fine with that. Like,
Right.
I don't have problems. But that is really nerve wracking to some people, as well as not knowing if you're going to have a paycheck next month or whatever.
Right. Yeah, which
Which
even
I
if
think
you
is the
do
other
the
really nervous people.
well, and with reason too. I mean, like we were
Yeah.
talking about with the COVID. I mean, there's definitely reasons why you cannot work, and then there's that. But then there's also the logistical reasons where there's some hospitals that you do the work, you submit your invoice, and they don't pay you for like a couple months.
Yep. Yep. That
Yeah.
is true.
Yeah, like I've
Yep.
absolutely had times where I'm just like, I don't know if I'm going to pay my credit card bills because like these checks haven't come in. Like, this is months of work now that I'm behind. I'm like, I shouldn't go to the grocery store, Like, what soup is in the cupboard? you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, so
I
not
have
without
to
reason.
say, I don't think I've ever been, although I'm a saver. So I don't think I've ever been to the point where I'm like, oh man, I'm feeling it. Now, I just did that a little bit just because I told you this. I bought my car. I bought my grandmother and my father a new car that has automatic braking and
Oh,
things like that, so that, a little bit safer.
right.
Um, and I did kind of like, okay, yeah, it was a very expensive 2 months.
Right.
Like, it all happened in the same 2 months, and it was like, and then I paid for some of our Hawaii trip and catamaran tour and all that stuff, and I was like, okay, yep, I gotta work this month. Put some extra shifts on there.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is the benefit. I do love the ability to be like, oh, well, what is it that I have to afford? All right, well, I guess I'll just work X number of shifts. Like that
Yep.
ability to have that flexibility is so nice because I'm the opposite. I'm like, all right, well, we'll figure it out kind of guy. I'm not good at saving. I'm more
Yeah.
of like a, disaster relief type of guy with
Says
my own
someone
life.
who only just started doing 401k.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and
Mm-hmm.
that's because I hired a guy who like said you need to do this. Um,
Yeah.
that's
Is
okay.
that the WCG people or?
No, so I mean those are my accountants who also have, but I have like they call themselves a wealth
Like a
advisor.
financial advisor?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. They say
Yeah.
wealth advisor, which I mean, come on. I don't know about wealth. My net worth is positive only.
Financial advisor sounds more realistic,
Right,
honestly.
exactly. It's funny because like they'll put in the side column like all the things that you have, and they won't put in the student loans because this guy's mostly
And you're
for.
like, oh, no, we don't want to look at
That's exactly
that.
right. He said, yeah, he's like, I like to not do that because he works with only doctors, so doctors, dentists, and veterinarians. He's like, I just don't
Yeah.
include the student loans so that it looks like you have a positive net worth.
Yeah.
I appreciate
Uh-huh.
that. Thank you. Yeah.
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 Yep.
But that is really nice is to be able to sort of pick up a shift and, whatever it is. So if something breaks down, like for example, we had to get air conditioning. So I'm like, all right, well, whatever it is, like $20,000. So then just divide that by whatever your shift rate is. And now you know how many extra shifts to pick up in the upcoming months.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that is nice, as opposed to when you have, all of the rest of my life, which was like, well, I'm making, you know, whatever, $8 an hour or five
whatever it
seventy
is.
five or whatever it is. Yeah, and you can only work
Yeah.
so much.
No.
So you're liking it. I mean, so you're enjoying what it
Oh,
is
I
that you're
like
doing.
it. I like it a lot.
Yeah.
I wonder if one day like things will get under control and I'll have to like actually take a job, which would be sad maybe. I don't know.
Maybe, but I don't. I mean, I think that what is going to happen is that we have to figure out how to deal with the shortage. I don't think that it's necessarily going to be that there's more people flooding into the industry.
Yeah.
I think that we just have to sort of figure out how to
Well,
make it work with the people that
vet
we have.
school in general, there's just not that many.
Right, and they can make more and all of that, but at the end of the day, it's a kind of a. I say that every ER doctor has a kind of lifespan. We just don't know what that is when we start, right? So it could be a
Yeah.
year, it could be 35
Yep.
years. We just have no
No, that's
idea.
true.
And I think that,
And
you
I
know,
think definitely a lot of people are burning out on ER,
yeah.
which I probably will at some point.
And so I think that coming up with ways to figure out how to make the whole system run a little bit more efficiently to have decreased reliance on the human resources, right? The people,
Yeah.
techs and
Yep.
doctors alike, is probably going to be the way that we have to end up moving forward. So
Yeah. That's
so,
true.
but either way, there's always going to be a need for somebody who is willing. If you're willing to do something undesirable, like travel around or whatever it is,
Yeah.
then there's always going to be something for you.
Well, and I think especially since I like to travel around,
Right.
if I wanted to do ER relief forever, I probably could.
Right.
Which I don't know. Maybe I will, maybe I won't.
Yeah, maybe.
Maybe at some point somebody will offer me some good money and I'll be like, you know what? Yeah, I could come work for you.
There was a guy. Reminds me of you. Someone was telling me about one of their doctors who comes in on a boat. So
Yeah.
so he'll give him a call from port or something, and he'll just be like, well, the wind's at 5 knots, so I may not make it. It's like, it's Tuesday, like your shift's on Friday. He's like, yeah, I don't think I'm gonna be there.
I actually think that would be super cool. I actually thought about doing it. Like, you could have a catamaran and you could just only go to places on the coast.
Yeah.
And you could just go up and down the East Coast
Yeah.
and just be like, "Nope, I'm working here for this month."
If that is
And
a
then,
job for anyone, it is for you. That is
yeah,
100% your style.
I could totally do that. Like, I could totally see myself doing it and thought about doing it. I just have to buy a catamaran first, which I'd have to actually save up for because
You should-
it's a big purchase.
Yeah, I'm sure. God.
Yeah,
Well,
I don't buy things that I can't afford, so
right. Yeah, that's more my style.
yeah. Yeah, I
Awesome.
waited out. I waited out. I don't need a catamaran today, but maybe one day I
Yeah.
could afford one and then play that game.
What is your sort of balance right now? I mean, how many shifts do you try to take a month?
At the moment, I'm struggling to hold myself to 8 shifts a month.
Okay. Nice.
Struggling in the way of not doing more than 8.
Right. Yeah, I'm sure that you
'Cause
found the same thing that I have, which is that saying no is actually the hardest part.
saying, and I feel like the first year, maybe even the second year, I really had to teach myself to say no, which
Mhm.
actually I found like to be really a little bit easier on relief because I
Oh,
realized at some point I'm like, oh God, they don't know what my schedule is. It's not like, it's a corporation and they know what my schedule is.
right.
And I have to come up with an excuse of why I can't work that shift.
Oh, that's
I
interesting.
don't have to make an excuse at all. I can be like, nope, can't do that. They
Hmm.
don't know that I have nothing to do and I want it that way. They don't know that.
Yeah, that's
They have no
interesting.
idea if I have Christmas plans or Thanksgiving or whatever. They
Yeah.
don't know. And
Yeah,
maybe I don't have any plans and I just am like, nope, not going to do it.
which is super valid anyway, right? Like we should be okay to say
Yeah.
no, even though we don't have some other obligation that we just,
Yeah. Which
yeah,
I feel like I only realized that maybe the like second year that I was working and was like, oh shit, I don't have to come up with a reason. There is no reason
yeah.
that I can just say no,
That
which I feel like it took me a lot longer than it should have to realize that
That's
and be like,
interesting.
oh, I
So
can just say no.
because I have a problem because it's relationships. I mean, the hospitals that I go to, there's
Yeah.
probably a handful of maybe like 5 to 8 hospitals that I really like and I like to go to, and that's really difficult to say no to because
Yep.
of that relationship and because I feel like I'm putting them in a bad spot, and or if I don't do
Yep.
it, then one of the other doctors do it. So I used to say
But then
yes all the time for
again,
that.
but then again, it's the same thing as everything else. Like you should be able to say no.
Right. Yeah. At some
And
point,
it's
I
up to
just
you. They're not going to say no.
right. Yeah, at some point I had to sort of tell myself, look, I can't save all of them, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it's a literal
Yeah, yeah.
impossibility for me to fill all the shifts that are available and being offered.
Oh yeah,
And
definitely.
I was burning
And I
out.
think in the beginning I did struggle with that. Like, oh, they don't have anybody and oh no. And
Yeah,
I was like, wait a second. I don't need to be working 20 shifts a month.
right. Yeah, because I was just
And then I would only
exhausted
say
and
no when I legit was working already, which is not a way to go.
right. Yeah, exactly. Because then you're always working.
Yes, which I did do that for a bit, which I've really done a better job of it. I feel like this year of being like, you know what? Nope.
Yeah,
I'm no excuses. I'm just gonna tell you no.
that's awesome. Yeah, I usually try to do an alternative. Like I'll say, no, I can't do this time for whatever reason, or don't give them a reason. But then how about this, or do you have anything available during this other time? Which
Yeah.
because my schedule is so full, and I also have a hard time not picking up a bunch. Like I'm trying to stay in that 7 to 10 range of shifts.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I find that ends up being difficult. But if I give them, something, it might be like months in advance. It might be like, well, I can't do, this weekend, but if you have anything in October or January of next year or something like that,
Yeah.
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 Well, good for you.
Which I don't know. Sometimes I try to like work some things and sometimes I'm like, nope,
Yeah, sometimes you just can't. You just can't anymore. Yeah, it's
can't do
true.
it. And sometimes I'm like, you know what? It's really close to holiday or it's a holiday weekend. My rates go up.
Right.
If it's a holiday weekend and I know it's going to be slammed and also it's a holiday
Yeah. I think
one
it's
off,
I
I
let
think that's a legit, hey, you owe me more money if I'm going to come and work this, you
yeah.
know,
I re-
extra shift thing.
I released myself from the guilt of that because I basically put it this way to myself, is that this is the amount of money that I'm willing to work for. And sometimes that amount of money is just a ridiculous amount of money, right? Because I don't want to work that. So like for me to
Yeah.
abandon so I do a friend's Thanksgiving every year. And so for me to abandon the friend's Thanksgiving, I mean, I don't think that there's an amount. Like I don't think that there's an amount of
Yeah.
money, but
Yep.
so if
And
people are
sometimes it isn't an amount. And sometimes, like, okay, it's not actually Thanksgiving. It's the 2 days. Like, I just had somebody was like, can you work the 26th and 27th?
right,
I'm like, yeah, for this amount.
right.
And they're like, oh, I'll get back to you. I'm like, okay.
Right, because it's not about, it's not about anything on them or whatever. It's just like this is what it is that I'm willing to work for during that time. And I think that we should
Yeah.
allow ourselves the freedom to be able to say that. And
Yeah.
you can make that price whatever it is. Like if you don't want to do veterinary medicine anymore, and if the only amount of money that you can come up with that will let you do it is too high for it to be paid, well then find something else to do. And I think that that's
Yeah.
reasonable as well.
Yeah.
But
No, that's true.
so it's not about like, what is the maximum that I can, create, make and all of that kind of thing. I think it really is just about what is it that I am okay accepting given these circumstances. And this is,
Yeah.
there's plenty of hospitals where, like, I actually work primarily, like, I'm focusing on one hospital that sort of sits in the middle of my range. Like, there's other hospitals that'll pay me more, but I don't like working there
Yeah.
as much. And then there's other
Yeah.
hospitals, of course, that'll pay me less,
Yeah.
And it's just
Yeah.
like, it's just a nice sweet spot. And for me, it's like, it's worth doing these shifts for this amount of money. And and that keeps me going.
Yep.
And that
And
keeps me
especially it's a place you enjoy, the place you know.
right. Yeah, exactly. So it's sort of this kind of, mix of everything that then lets me keep doing this, right? So then I show
Yeah.
up next month and then the month after that, and I'm not, getting burned out. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
True.
Well, I appreciate you taking the time to, talk to me about your life in,
Yeah.
in this industry. So I'll talk to you soon.
Yeah. Later.
All
Bye.
right, bye. So that was my conversation with Amber Davidson. Yeah, listening back to it now, I remember she was packing for a trip to Hawaii, and I swear during the conversation, I'm like, are you packing like right now, like as we're talking? So it's like, I will say that I've never actually had a podcast guest multitasking, engaging in some other activity while we were talking. So that's something. Um, I'm glad that I could be of use. Yeah, as we were signing off, she's like, "Nah, don't worry about it. I still got more packing to do." I'm like, "I'm sorry." What? All right. Again, same thing. I bet, it's like I have a fancy microphone and an arm that is that I can move around and have that right in front of me as I record into my fancy software. And she's just meandering around the apartment, packing up a carry-on because she's not gonna check a bag. That's just gonna get lost. There's no way. Just again, very different. Her and I love it. Maybe I'm compelled and intrigued by these people who like to travel or tend to travel. It's something that I think we all, in some way, have a little bit of a wanderlust, and she did it. And Amber is she's just like a small woman who is just sleeping in her car all throughout New Zealand and just meandering through Europe. No fear whatsoever. And I find that very, like, I have more fear. All right. I am taller and bulkier and more afraid than she is. And I think that that's admirable and something that, again, I can absolutely learn from. And I'm sure that we all in some ways can. Talking to individuals who are in the emergency relief arena, it's of course, specifically interesting to me because then I get to see what their experiences are and how are we all kind of dealing with the same types of struggles. And even some of the kind of business things of how do we run this business? How do we charge? What is the value that we're providing? All of that is really nice to have some additional perspective on. And I think that it's, as I continue to talk to all these colleagues about this job, it's just interesting now for me to look back on my perspective when I first started about the challenges that I believed would sit in front of me. I was taking shifts all over the place. I would drive 8 hours between shifts and then work that next day because I was afraid of saying no to anything. I just wanted to accept whatever was offered to me because I was confident that at some point they would stop offering. And I find that, talking to people now, just like Amber was talking about, I mean, she hasn't needed to expand her network. She just works for the hospitals that she works for. And there's a comfort there. And if we needed to, then we can. But it's nice to kind of be on this side now, talking to people, looking back at this battlefield that, we slogged our way through and, wondering, gosh, if only we had known at that time what we know now, what would we have done differently? But at the same time, I mean, that's any journey, right? You got to start it. You can't sit there forever and study the maps and pull out the compass and try to figure out exactly which bearing you're going to be and how long you're going to travel in whatever direction. You're going to do that in your idling car until you run out of gas, or you're just going to do it forever until you die. At some point, you got to just start. You got to go with whatever information you have at the time and just start moving. And that's kind of how I think all of us, in some way or another, started doing relief. I know it is how I did. And she kind of was already involved with some of these hospitals. And Just the nature of her position allowed her to continue doing the work that she was able to do with these same clients. I mean, just an easy little transition over. For me, I had no idea how to expand the network. I tried all these different things, and I just started working. And maybe it wasn't the best, most cost effective, mental, emotional, energy cost effective way of going about it. But it is the way that I got to where I am, and I'm very glad for that. And again, I've met all these people along the way, and I've learned so much. I guess looking back, I'm not sure if I would do it differently. I'm glad I'm doing it differently now. So maybe that's the lesson. Do what you need to do, work tirelessly, and then stop and reevaluate, and then do it again, and then keep going. And as long as what you're doing is in line with your values, then you're on the right path. So, and take some moments to go explore New Zealand in a van, because apparently that's a great time. It's on my bucket list, and one of these days, ooh, boy, oh boy, New Zealand's waiting for me. New Zealand is one of these places that I've always wanted to go to. When I was a kid, my mom got remarried, and then she went with her then husband, that I was not fond of. So I was like, I'm not going with you guys. And she would not stop talking about how beautiful New Zealand was. They did a lot of trips like that. Before that, we just didn't have any money or ability to like go on these types of trips. And then, all of my 20s, and then through my early 30s, I was just working as basically like a poor student or a theater person or whatever it was. I just didn't have the ability to go. So it wasn't until I was like 32, 33 that I actually took a vacation. And it's just, New Zealand is just one of those, it's been on the list forever. It's just such a time commitment to like get down there. When I want to go, I want to go. I want to go for like a month and a half. And hop on over to Australia. And, since I'm there, since I'm in the region, I'm already in the neighborhood, might as well pop on over. There was a time when I was actually thinking about, there was a job that was posted for, it was a teaching position at one of the vet schools in Australia. And I'm like, yes, that. But, I didn't. So once again, thank you to Amber Davidson for joining me on the podcast, and thank you to everyone listening. I am glad that you're all out there. I feel like a crazy person just talking into a computer, watching the timer tick down. So it's nice to know that there's somebody potentially on the other end. If you haven't already, subscribe. Please share this amongst everyone. If you already have, thank you for doing that as well. You doing that lets me continue to do this, which means that I can spend a little bit more time at home and a little bit more time off the road. And truly, it just allows me to talk to as many people as I possibly can. I'm a chatterbox, and I love it. But also, I need my alone time. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now. You guys have a wonderful day. And until next time, may you leave work on time and go directly to do something fun.